Dopamine swipe, dopamine swipe. Followers, likes, double tap. Now they control your life.
What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 podcast, where we talk about the lovely city of Fort Worth, Texas. We talk about politics, culture, business, news, and every week, Monday morning, we drop an episode to talk about these important things. Today, we have Ann Zeta back from New Zealand. How are you?
I'm doing well. I do have to say that I thought I had rocked the jet lag situation my first day back because I went to bed. We lost a whole day, basically. We left Saturday evening at 7:55 in the evening and got back to DFW at like 8:30 on Saturday. So just a whole day gone. So we went to bed that night and I woke up at a regular time in the morning and I thought, I've got this. And then the next couple of nights, I was waking up in the middle of the night just staring into the darkness. It was easier to keep my eyes open than it was to hold them closed.
Wow.
And I have not gotten back regular.
In groove yet.
I've been a little bit foggy on some of the day, during the days I've been up and awake and I've been just trying. But the last couple of nights, I've stayed up way too late. I've woken up early in the morning, fallen back asleep, and then not woken up till like 10:30. So good thing we're recording a little late.
I know,
today
we're a late start today. But let's go ahead. We have a lot to talk about. You being gone, you leave for 2 weeks and all the crazies decide to show up. So we had Kyle Rittenhouse in town hanging out with Wayborn. We had Nick Fuentes hanging out with GOP consultants in Tarrant County. We had Nazis eating at Torchy Tacos. We had a lot this week.
I don't know if I provide some kind of force field when I'm in town or what, but it's very disturbing that these things happened in my absence. I apologize.
Yeah, we can't have you gone too often. So the big story that I think that picked up in the Texas Tribune was the one about Jonathan Strickland, the ultra-conservative leader who donated millions of dollars to high-profile Texas leaders. He hosted a prominent white supremacist Nick Fuentes and other right-wing activists for over 7 hours on Friday. It's also important to know, I didn't know who Nick Fuentes was really until I started doing some reading and following up on that name. He was one of the people who participated in Charlottesville, got very popular from Charlottesville, and he then started his YouTube channel and his brand, dropped out of college. He's only 25 years old, but he just said a lot of crazy things, from supporting neo-Nazi agenda stuff to hating the queer community to Muslims. And so,
And I think what kicked it off here was that on Sunday, there was the Texas Tribune published a photo of Fuentes at the headquarters of Pale Horse Strategies, where he spent 7 hours on Friday. And that is owned by Jonathan Strickland, who used to be a state representative. So, and his political action committee has a lot of funding from two West Texas oil billionaires, and they've used millions of dollars to give to right-wing candidates, including Attorney General Ken Paxton and Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. But that meeting set off a firestorm in the Capitol of people talking about, him coming and meeting with some folks. It seems like a lot of the things he says are just that kind of crazy inflammatory stuff that you hear about from conspiracy theorists on the internet, and you can go down rabbit holes and hear that kind of stuff. But what's disturbing is when folks that are in positions of power, either in elected office or in consulting businesses that are donating to people in elected office, bring those folks in to have conversations. It gives them some kind of appearance of legitimacy, which is concerning and disturbing.
These are not all the same story. It's just crazy how all incidents happen in roughly 7 days. So the Nick Fuentes was one. The Nazi group showing up to Torchy's, which happened. And then Torchy's did come out and said, hey, we're against hate and we don't accept this. But they were also at the Botanical Gardens and other places around the city that maybe we weren't aware of.
Yeah, I think they were in the parking lot at the Botanic Gardens putting flyers on the cars. And as soon as the gardens found out that had happened, they went and collected those back up again and removed them from the remaining cars.
Yeah, there was people, just imagine sitting at a stop sign and then a guy with the Nazi logo on his arm is trying to knock on your window to give you something. I would be terrified.
Yeah, or if you walked into a restaurant to eat, or we're sitting
Yeah.
in a restaurant and a whole group of people
Yeah.
dressed in that kind of outfit.
Yeah.
You know, coming up on Halloween, the first thing you might think is that these people are dressed up in really thoughtless and inappropriate costumes, but apparently this group, are wearing these things without any irony.
This is just a running list of things. There was also on X that the Twitter that Kyle Rittenhouse was with Bill Wayborn. He deleted the tweet. So we just had a run of things, and it all just kind of come together. And I just think it's one. I know. It just feels like we should hear more of our leadership standing against this, hearing comments about how this is wrong. I feel like if there has been anything, it's been still relatively light, not as strong as it should be.
Bud Kennedy's piece, which is an opinion piece, basically titled "Nazis at Torchy's Showed a Big Problem. Now it's time to speak up, Fort Worth." And he describes kind of all of these incidences and basically says what you and I were speaking about a little while ago. And that is, I think there's a whole lot of people that are just living their lives and don't even know this is happening. And he rattles off kind of other instances of organizations that either are, call Tarrant County and Fort Worth home or have been here. And, it's not, they touch on the fact that there's, freedom of speech and people can say what they want to say and espouse the things that they want to espouse. But he lists off multiple organizations of Oath Keepers and Patriot Front and Proud Boys and Steadfast Baptist Church. And these are all organizations that have come and said some really, in my opinion, horrible and objectionable stances on various things and negative opinions about various groups that they don't agree with or individuals that they don't agree with. And yes, they have the right to say these things, but we also should be aware that folks that espouse these opinions and beliefs are in our community.
Bud Kennedy's article talked about how in Fort Worth we're taught to keep our mouth shut and just play nicely. And I mean, like, even, that's the part where I thought the 817 podcast was just like this net new energy in Fort Worth, where we weren't afraid to say what we wanted to say. We're willing to be authentic about things and just show it on their side. I mean, you have to see Tarrant County, 11 of the 92 Texans facing charges from January 6th, live in Tarrant County. That's the most in Texas. You had the Oath Keeper guy. He's not just recruiting here. He was living in Granbury. The Oath Keepers was pioneered in Granbury by Stuart Rose. And then, like you said, you had the Patriot Front stuff. And so Tarrant County is not just, being a visiting site stop to these things. We are a nucleus to the growth that spits out this hate across the country. And I think that's why our county is very important to the elections, because then if it's not us, the second group is Collin County. So, they're also very involved and interweaved in a lot of this. Well, that was our first short story. Something we don't like talking about is hate, but what we do like talking about, Ann, is some transportation updates and some planning. So we have a lot there. So can you kind of give the audience an introduction to what you've seen this last week in publications across transportation and development?
Yeah, there's been a couple of articles. The first one I'll touch on is a Fort Worth a Fort Worth Report article. Fort Worth Stockyards study recommends 31 million transportation makeover. And this was presented at, I think, the council work session last week, where they discussed some changes to streets and such to make the Stockyards area more pedestrian friendly. The Stockyards have been popular and continued to grow and had some adaptive reuse and historic preservation, and a lot of activity has been going on. But for anyone who has visited the Stockyards, you'll know that there are streets where cars are driving relatively quickly. There's parking that sometimes becomes really dangerous because folks are just trying to park anywhere they possibly can, squeeze in on places where they're blocking visibility. So if someone's trying to cross the street, they're not seen by cars that are driving on the street, and all of that. So the council was briefed on October 10th in a work session, which highlighted 22 projects that would be accomplished over a few years. And they broke those projects into short term, medium term, and long term, and then assigned costs to all of them. They've done some cost projections as to when those projects could be taken under, carried out and done, because they all have to clearly be funded, and funding comes from a variety of sources. So by doing all of this, they have those studies. The study highlights those projects, and then they can determine kind of the prioritization. I would say that the only thing that I loved all the projects that they were proposing. The only thing that I didn't see that I think is something that's been discussed over the years that, in my opinion, should happen, and I don't think they're recommending it in this study, and that is closing the main part of Exchange Street where the cattle drive happens twice a day to cars all the time. I know that there's some additional parking garages proposed that would allow people to park and you can get to most of the parking lots that are along that street from the backside streets.
Yep.
And so there's been some photographs I've seen and some events that have happened where they have closed that street to cars, and it fills with pedestrians. And a lot of times pedestrians walk in that area as if they don't think any cars are coming. So I think that if they're not going to close it to cars all the time, I think maybe that would have been a good thing to at least study to determine if that's
And that also doesn't
safety
seem
thing.
like, that seems like it doesn't cost anything. Just saying, this is open for the community to walk on.
And a lot of times businesses fear that and think that if people can't drive their cars and, park in very, very close proximity to their business, like right out in front, that they're going to lose business. But I've seen study after study after study that show an economic impact that is of benefit to stores and people purchasing things and shopping when they have that pedestrian and bike only access. I mean, having plenty of places for people to get. And I know they're also looking at some more connectivity via public transportation. Right now, you can take a bus from the train station and you can take a bus from downtown to get to the stockyards. And so I think all of that needs to be emphasized as well whenever we're doing these transportation studies. But good to see that they are looking at that. I think there are some streets, Main Street has quite fast traffic. There's not a whole lot of places to cross. I know I was at Rose Marine Theater and Arts de la Rosa and was trying to get to a restaurant across the street and had to walk down the street to get to a crosswalk. And even then, didn't feel like it was the safest crosswalk.
Yeah.
So I think a lot of this is adding bulb outs to shorten the distance for people crossing the street. When I was at Arts de la Rosa for an event the other day, we saw a family walking across Main Street with a tiny little pony and a child riding on the pony. I mean, this is Fort Worth and the stockyards, so it was amazing. But that's, having multimodal streets that are comfortable and safe for all users, I think, is the direction that we're moving in. So that story covered that. And then there was a second story on the future of downtown Fort Worth, which includes more housing and walkable public spaces. So over the last 18 months, I believe, Downtown Fort Worth, Inc. has been engaged in updating their plan, which they do every 10 years. And the future of downtown Fort Worth is reimagined through an updated strategic plan. So this is Plan 2033, and it was presented also at that October 10th meeting. And it charts a future that includes more housing and small businesses and better public spaces and improved public transportation. So the plan studied the area, the core of the city and the surrounding areas, including the east of the city's core around Samuels Avenue. And the plan produced an official vision that emphasizes walkability and a vibrant and romantic downtown. So I participated on this update on a couple of the committees. And I think that the outcome of this is a good plan for downtown. It addresses all of the aspects. They've been doing this strategic plan every 10 years for I don't know how many years now. And, just like on the Stockyards plan, I think the only thing that I had suggested, and some others as well, and it's been considered over the years, is the one-way streets that exist in downtown. There's a couple of one-way street couplets like Belknap and Weatherford that are very major streets that come into downtown on either side of the courthouse. But there's some other one-way streets that are not quite that robust and connected to highways the way that one is. That I think one-way streets tend to induce people to drive faster than they should in a downtown environment. And they've redone a lot of the streets in downtown, so they're very smooth now. And I think that also kind of induces people to go faster than they should. I think in a downtown environment, you shouldn't be going faster than 20 miles an hour, because there could be someone stepping off of a curb pretty much anywhere along the way. And I mean, maybe having those one-way streets helps people slow down a little bit because they never know which direction they're able to turn because they might be on a one-way street. But I don't think everybody does that. And so there's a couple of one-ways in downtown that I think could have been undone. And then I think the consultant also, during the process, brought up the possibility of making Main Street through like the spine of downtown, Main Street, all of it pedestrian only, like Sundance Square is. So, Sundance Square has Main Street that goes right through it, and it's been closed to traffic. It has bollards that can be removed so that, parades or something could go through there. But one of the ideas that I think they considered was, possibly closing Main Street to traffic. But I think, again, it would have to be, businesses would have to be convinced. And I'm maybe that was not a step that they were ready to take at this point. So I don't think that is part of the recommendations for the next 10 years.
You also had the convention center. That was another story. What's your understanding of that?
They were talking about the renovation of the convention center. They renovated the end of the convention center closest to the water gardens. It's been many years now. And the plan all along has been that eventually they would take a look at the flying saucer end of the convention center, which is, as many cool concerts and things that people who have experienced there and makes them feel nostalgic about it. My understanding from those who run conventions is that space is not serving us well any longer. And so that redesign of the convention center not only is going to remove and redevelop that end of it, it also is going to straighten out Commerce Street on the east side of the convention center, where the street kind of bows out like an eyebrow, to accommodate kind of the back of house of the convention center. But they're redoing all of that, and that street's going to be straightened out, which opens up developability to the east of the convention center for another convention center hotel. So I think the article was speaking to the cost of that and whether it's worth it. I believe that the Visit Fort Worth group and the city economic development team has looked pretty closely at the types of conventions that we could host if we had more convention center hotel rooms, if we had the facilities that this redevelopment is going to bring. And so I think they believe that, and the numbers indicate that there would be a return on that investment that would take care of the cost.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, looking at it, it says the most recent cost projections from early this year are over $700 million, more than double an estimate of $324 million 4 years ago. But when you look at that compared to Dallas is looking to remodel its convention center, and they're going to invest $3.7 billion to upgrade its Kay Bailey Hutchinson Convention Center and add a new 2.5 million square foot facility next door. So the cost of $700 million is relatively cheap compared to when you look at other competitive cities. And if we're trying to say we're a big city, we got to start looking at spending on our convention centers to be elite to compete with those world-class convention centers. Because if you've been to those other cities, there's some pretty good stuff that they have downtown. Any conferences I've been a part of, if I had to be at in Atlanta, to Austin, to San Francisco, or whatever, their convention centers are really nice. So I can see that being the case. I
do love the iconic visual that this flying saucer end of the convention center does provide as far as taking photographs up and down Main Street. And I hope that what they end up designing for that end is interesting and not just kind of a reflection of what they've done on the other end, because the other end is just, more ballroom space and all that. So I think that's important, but I think they need to do something that is architecturally interesting too. I think this plan also looks at that whole park area where the JFK Memorial is, and kind of redesigning and reinvigorating that. And I know that the public art program for Fort Worth has a the word is escaping me, but like an iconic, that's it, the iconic piece of art. They're looking at a couple locations to put an iconic piece of art. And because I think this is a capital project for which 1% of the budget would go towards public art, some kind of public art piece, that could go towards that iconic piece. And that could be something that exists in front of the convention center in that plaza area. So I just hope that it's not just bland. Other convention centers, Nashville's, I think, if you look at it from the air, is shaped like a guitar. So there's interesting.
Yeah, no, yeah, and people are doing a lot of very swanky, cool stuff. Obviously, you see what's going on with like Las Vegas's like circular concert thingy that's immersive, but then they've also put in a lot of different infrastructure with the Raiders Stadium. There's a couple different places I've gone that looks extremely futuristic. So funding for phase one has been primarily from city's 9% hotel occupancy tax. Last year, the city also received $52 million from the American Rescue Plan Act funding to kickstart the expansion. Funding for phase two, which we're talking about, could require raising the city's hotel tax rate, but it's unclear when that would go before the city council. No property tax revenue would be used for the project.
Right.
So,
and then just one more thing that wasn't an article, I don't believe, but was something that the City News put out. The East Side Transportation Plan has some meetings upcoming this week, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, I believe. So we'll put that in the show notes because those are all opportunities for folks to see what the plans are and give their input on that, because they're taking a look at the transportation on the east side of Fort Worth in connection to land use as well. So, proposing to bring a lot of really good things that would both improve transportation and land use, and hopefully that would improve housing and all kinds of other things. So I don't have the art, there's no article in front of me, but I did provide EJ with some links to the meetings that are coming up, and we've shared some of those meetings on our calendar at Community Design Fort Worth. So if people are interested in the community engagement that is being hoped to happen with the city, those are some opportunities to chime in and have your voice be heard.
All right, so the third story here is a story that we've been shocked that it's been under the radar, but we have an election on November 7th, and we all need to be aware of this. I mean, also, I guess I'm shocked that we haven't talked about it either, but there'll be different constitutional amendments. And since no one's running technically, right? No one's running for office, which is probably why it's been under the radar. But we have Texas State Park infrastructure and other things that we'll be deciding the fate in by voting. So let's go ahead and dive into the article. Texans will decide the fate of 14 constitutional amendments recently sent to the ballot by the state lawmakers for November 7th election. Many of the proposed amendments would create or alter funds to support higher education research, water infrastructure, gas-fueled power plants, broadband infrastructure, maintenance and creation of state parks. Several others will address taxes by raising the homestead exemption for homeowners from $40,000 to $100,000, creating some tax exemptions for medical equipment and child care facilities, banning lawmakers from imposing a wealth tax without voter approval. Other amendments would affect Texans in certain professions by granting retired teachers cost of living raises, raising the mandatory retirement age for state judges, protecting generally accepted farming and ranching practices from state and local regulation. And two would impact Galveston and El Paso County specifically, allowing Galveston County to eliminate the position of county treasurer and for El Paso County to use bonds for parks and recreational development. So, basically looking at each one, none of them really came out too jarring, but what is your kind of take on why this is a quiet session, and what is your take on as a voter?
Oh, it drives me absolutely insane that we don't make a bigger deal about voting. And I think some of it is that people just are like, oh my God, there's an election every other day.
Yeah.
And how am I supposed to keep up with all this? Well, part of it would be, if there was information in the news about it. So I did see a couple of local elected people sharing the last day to make sure that you were registered for this upcoming election. So there were a few people here locally who shared that. I think the mayor shared it on her page and a couple other folks. But I think just every opportunity we get to encourage people to vote and not feel like voting is something that is a pain, because it really isn't. It's pretty easy.
Yeah.
But if you have 14 constitutional amendments and you read the description of them that's going to be on the ballot,
Yeah.
it's not really easy to understand what it is that they're doing when you read those descriptions. But this Tribune article and a couple other articles that I've seen have a little bit more description going into the detail of exactly what these things will do. And I, like you said, I don't think most of them don't seem to be obnoxious in any form or fashion. There is one about the retirement age of judges that, as someone who's married to an attorney, I asked him his opinion on that one. And it basically is making the retirement age older. And I'm not sure how I feel about that, because when I look around, I think that it might be best to continue to encourage, the next generation to step up and do these things. And so, we definitely have some older people running for public office. And if we have older people being judges, I don't necessarily think that that's always reflective of the community. We tout how young Fort Worth is. And so this, I think, just discourage, if people stay in office or stay in their judge positions until they're 75 years old, that's just, discouraging younger folks from getting involved, maybe. So that seemed like the only one that I was like, why are we doing this? But some of the others seem to be pretty good. I think there was the one that talks about banning lawmakers from imposing wealth tax. It seems like that's just basically saying we can't tax folks that have more money more. And I think that might be a little bit short-sighted. I mean, if they are making more money, there seems like they would have more taxable income. But people are constantly asking elected officials to provide services. And you got to think about the fact that the services that are provided are paid with taxes. So if you're constantly, as the current legislators, making those, restrictions and reducing the ability for folks to find pathways to fund the things that citizens are asking for, I just think it's always a conversation to be had instead of just like, let's ban this right now because this group of people think it's not a good idea. Because that closes the opportunity of having the conversation in the future.
Yeah. And, going with the age thing, I mean, but I saw an article about how the United States has more 70-year-old politicians than any other nation. Like we're very much kind of have the lack of passing down the torch. There needs to be some type of federal mentoring act that, they even get awarded for stepping down and mentoring someone up. Like there needs to be some type of incentive to get the older, experienced people out of power to give it up so that they can teach, because you also do need the education from them to be experienced to figure it out. It's not just like retire and jump ship, but how do you build a bridge of a part of your service is to identify someone to then coach up.
Yep.
And then you do get incentives and benefits for taking that path rather than just
staying there forever.
Yeah.
Dying in office.
Yeah. So,
but this article has all the information about what you need to bring with you to vote. October 10th was the last day to register if you weren't registered. So if you're not registered, you're not going to be able to vote in this election. But early voting in person runs from October 23rd through November 3rd, and election day is November 7th. It talks about what to bring with you if you run into issues, and then goes into all the details of what's on the ballot. So we just encourage everybody to inform themselves and do their civic duty of participating in the election process, even though it's just quote unquote constitutional amendment.
All right. Well, while we were just giving you guys an update on the amendments and voting, we just found out that our person who was going to be our guest today was a no-show. So the Texas Blockchain Council, Lee Bratcher, did not show for the interview, but I do want to acknowledge that is hosting the North American Blockchain Summit November 15th to the 17th. If you're interested, you can get involved. I know you're kind of relieved.
I am a little relieved. This was going to fall heavily on your shoulders. I listened to a bunch of podcasts to try to get up to speed about blockchain and Bitcoin and all of the things in that arena, and I came away from all of it still being just as confused as I was to begin with. So I was looking forward to if he was going to be able to explain these things to me, but after all the things that I've listened to, I still don't get it. I think I might continue to. So I would have been happy to have him, but
I call it a spade a spade. I believe that, it's very likely that the Texas Blockchain Group, when you look at who's on their board and who represents and supports them, he probably listened to our pod and realized that's a pod I should probably not go on. And so, but that to me shows, that this is not the first time that happened. When me and Jimmy, we had the Fort Worth lacrosse team was supposed to come on. I think they were told not to be able to come on after we were supposed to be. They were doing their runs on different podcasts. So when you are a transparent, authentic podcast that doesn't have to kiss butt to Texas, you end up, people can't get out and talk. So unfortunately,
I hope people don't think that they can't come on here because of, maybe the personal opinions of those of us who are on this show. I would still like to be able to have conversations with anybody and everybody.
Yeah, and that's
part of the issue that we run into is people not being willing to speak.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Other. We will ask the hard question. We want to ask an authentic question. And so, yeah. So anyways, I still think, I'm not necessarily into the Bitcoin stuff or like the digital coin stuff, but the idea of a blockchain verifying or certifying us, imagine this podcast. Let's say there was an AI version of this happening and some robots were talking like me and you. And how would people know that podcast is the right one or this one? And so the idea of a digital blockchain that allows you to certify what's human and what's AI as more and more AI stuff gets created, that stuff was interested to me. And also I'm not like, the people he had as guests at the conference were people I was really into, obviously Andrew Yang's books, Balaji Srinivasan, The Network State was probably one of my top 5 books last year. So I feel like I could have given an objective, let's have a conscious conversation about this with him. And so, however, I also would have been like, hey, what happened to Riot and us giving them $30 billion so we can have electricity? I don't know if you remember that article. So I would have gone the whole gamut with him. So, but anyways, what we're going to do for all of you is we are going to do wins and losses, and we're going to add a bonus wins and losses. Because trust me, this week was plenty full without a guest. So we're going to go ahead and hit that. We're going to give you 3 losses, 3 wins, and what's our first loss?
So our first loss is that a health conference was canceled after JPS pulled sponsorship over abortion and transgender agenda items. There was the Ralph Anderson Women's Health Symposium was supposed to be held on September 8th, and speakers and attendees from across the state were traveling to Fort Worth for the day-long conference. And it's been held for decades, but the morning before this year's conference at 10:40 a.m., one of the organizers sent an email to her colleagues saying that one of the conference sponsors, JPS Health Network, had abruptly withdrawn funding because the event schedule included talks about abortion and gender-affirming care. So I think that the article goes into a lot of detail, and there's a lot of, I'm not sure it's totally clear as to why it was canceled. It seems like their contribution was only $6,000. I would hope that these 2 organizations could make that up and continue on with the conference to talk about these topics. I know that they're controversial in Texas, and there is some, discussion about the fact that these things are illegal in Texas, and maybe that's why they don't want to talk about it. But I think people who are in the medical profession and need to have their continuing education need to continue to be educated and informed about topics that are addressed across the nation, not just restrict themselves to the things that have been deemed unacceptable right here in Texas.
Yeah, and it's important to know that Tarrant County commissioners approve the budget for JPL's network. So a lot of the cuts that are happening, a lot of, I guess, also you've seen the political backfire with Girls Inc. last week. this just seems like another way of Terrence Commissioner's political views, getting into things that we should be educating people about, even if we are making it something we're not having support and access to in Texas.
Yep.
Cool. So the next loss that we have for you is actually this was posted right after our last week's podcast, where we're talking about the state of the address that our mayor Maddie Parker delivered about how great Texas cities are booming. But there was a article October 9th about Texas cities. Everything's booming in Texas, but their offices are the most vacated. So let me actually show you a stat here that I thought was interesting. It says Houston, Dallas, and Austin top the list of major U.S. cities with the highest office vacancy rates, according to Moody's Analytics. About 25% of their office space wasn't leased as of the third quarter of 2023. That was more than double New York's vacancy rates of 12% and well above San Francisco's vacancy rates of 7%. 17%. And so if you really look at this, we also heard it in John Goff's interviews around, where he was also saying that there's places that have 80% lease, but actual occupants showing up to the building. Yeah, they may have a business on contract there, but only 30% of the people in office are actually showing up. So even if you do have the contracts locked in, you then also don't have the people showing up. So all this like robust economy of people going out to lunch, people hanging out after work, happy hours, whatever comes from having people at work, even regardless of like, this was just showing that we have vacancies. But even if Fort Worth's touting that we have the other pieces that we don't have the vacancies, national and state data around office space looks to be low. And I think that's a loss, because that wasn't this, we're hyping it up. And the stories that we pay for and invest into the market, they tell a different story. And I think the loss is like, why is this not aligning?
Yeah, I think that during the conversation with Downtown Fort Worth Inc. and the update to that plan, they did talk a bit about the evolution of officing and coming into the office, and the combination of people working from home and actually coming into the office. And I don't think we have settled where we're going to settle yet.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that the opportunity in Fort Worth is, if you do end up with office space that's vacant, the possibility of reconfiguring that to residential and reconfiguring that to hotel, which is something that's already happening. Lots of hotels going in Fort Worth. But I think it can still be something that might end up okay for Fort Worth. I don't think Fort Worth is specifically listed in this article with the numbers of the percentage of occupancy. But yeah, I think it's definitely something all major cities are going to have to look at, because I think that the workplace is evolving.
Yeah, and it's just like Texas office floors are struggling to find tenants, even though the state's workers have been more eager to get back to the office than in other cities. When you really look at vacancies are high, largely because Texas developers build too much. All three cities experienced a surge in construction in the 1980s when the tax rules favored developers and loose lending created commercial real estate bubble. Another construction spurt in the late 1990s aggravated the problem. So Texas' high vacancy rates offer more evidence that the U.S. office market's biggest problem hasn't been remote work. It's a glut of buildings across the U.S., which has been decades in the making, and helps explain why the country has long had much higher vacancy rates than Europe or Asia. So it's a yin and yang of how easy it is to develop in Texas, and then we have the sprawl that we're kind of in this limbo. And to me, the solution just seems to be keep doing the same thing as we're building more hotels, and they're trying to interweave it. And I think their solution is, if we can build condos on top of, and then there's office spaces on top of those condos, and then there's a gym on the bottom floor, and then there's restaurants in the back, maybe people will go to an office and, pay for it. So it seems like those are the attempts of the new projects we have. It
is that total live, work, play thing that city planners nerd out on. And one of the places that we visited in Auckland, New Zealand, my husband booked us into this hotel that was the first 5-star green sustainable hotel in all of Auckland. And it was in this area right on the harbor where all the ships come in. And it was very much like I picked up the brochure about the location, and it's very much like live, work, play. And my husband just thought the Green Hotel would be of interest to me, but it turned out we were smack dab in the middle of a city planner's dream in the area that we were at. Markets and people working and people living and walking around and public transportation and all of the things right there. So I think that downtowns are still kind of evolving to, and maybe this will help it reinvigorate it. They reference some of these office spaces being kind of out in the sprawled areas. And, you know, I think those office spaces might have a harder time getting people to come back because they don't have that close proximity of all of those things that are being used now to kind of lure people back to the office.
Yeah. Well, let's go into the final loss. This is our third and bonus loss. We are going to highlight a Bloomberg article. I guess this is more of a state loss. Absurd inspections halt 19,000 trucks at Texas-Mexico border. Goods valued at $1.9 billion have been halted at the border. President Lopez Obrador criticized border crackdowns on Monday last week. Texas Governor Abbott border security crackdown is clogging up commercial crossings. You're looking at Mexico's biggest trucking group said in a statement October 26 that this is absurd. The holdups make it exceedingly difficult for business to manage supply. When you're held up for hours and you're bringing in important assets and resources, this has just gotten really impacted. Mid-morning on Monday, there was a 240-minute wait time for a commercial vehicle to cross to the Zaleta Bridge into El Paso. According to government figures, about $443 billion in electronics, fruit, nuts, machinery crossed into the U.S. via Texaco ports in 2021. So you're talking about our economy being impacted by this kind of stuff. And I guess like the real part is everyone talks about inflation and costs, and they go to us, our federal dollars being spent. But you're also having these people trying to bring resources in our country, and they're being stopped. And so these companies already accounted in this to happen, so they price up everything else because they know that things are going to spoil, not make it in time, things like that. And so that cost goes on to me and you and other Americans who can't get the stuff that we purchased and at the cost we for sure got before.
Yeah, it seems like political posturing for issues that affect the things that they purport to want to have run smoothly, like business.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and move into our win so we can finish with a successful podcast. Which one would you like to go to first?
So there was an article in the Fort Worth Report called Trademark Properties Plans More Pedestrian-Friendly Left Bank. So if you're unfamiliar, the Left Bank is a development that is just west of downtown after you cross over the West 7th Bridge coming out of downtown and into the West 7th area. There's a Hop Dottie on the corner, and there's a Tom Thumb grocery store. Many of these buildings have entrances that face West 7th Street, but a lot of their main entrances kind of face the parking lots behind. Thankfully, when these were developed, we kind of stuck to our guns as a city with the requirement that they have facing the street kind of windows and doors and that sort of thing. But I don't think that it has been the most walkable development. But a local developer has purchased this property most recently, Trademark Properties, and their plans are to kind of make them do some more placemaking there. Trademark owns two shopping centers in Fort Worth where they have done some of this placemaking work. One is West Bend on University, across from University Park Shopping Center that backs up to the Trinity River. And the other is Waterside on Bryant Irvin, where REI and Whole Foods is located. And their whole philosophy is kind of placemaking, making it an inviting place for community to come and sit and gather and stay and linger. And so, which they have done at West Bend and Waterside. And now that is their plan to look at the tenant mix they think is good, but they'd like to put some effort into making some placemaking there. So I think that will be of benefit. So that was my first win of articles that we were considering.
Awesome. Now, I know the other articles you really were the one, to me, in my opinion, found the wins. So I'm going to let you kind of continue to gracefully move through them, as I was more responsible for the losses this week. You're off of vacation, so you're still in a positive mood.
Yes.
So there you go. But you want to go ahead and move into the Paving Paradise one
Sure.
as well?
So there was the two things that talked. I think you guys covered the mayor's State of the City address, where she made a major announcement about a new initiative called Good Natured, which is an open space program. And there was a Fort Worth Report article, Can Fort Worth Keep from Paving Paradise? Fort Worth's mayor says this new initiative will help. So when she made her announcement about this open space initiative, she referenced lyrics from Joni Mitchell, which was really close to my heart too, because that's a song I grew up listening to as well, where they said, "You don't know what you've got till it's gone. They paved paradise and put up a parking lot." Well, we won't talk about my issues with parking, but yes, I totally agree. We should definitely make efforts to make sure that we don't do that. So this article talks about, as we move into Fort Worth faces a challenge with their park system. Only 62% of residents live within 10 minutes walk of a park, and Fort Worth is behind other U.S. major cities in terms of park access. So I think this program's, a couple people have been a little bit confused, like, is she talking about parks or is she talking about open space? And I think there are two distinct programs that both are beneficial and positive, and so are therefore wins. That is programmed parks that have equipment and play stuff and active things in them. It's important to make sure that those are available within a 10-minute walk from all of our neighborhoods. And then this open space initiative, which is to make sure that not all land is developed with paving and development. And so this is an initiative where they're actually putting some funding behind that, where they plan to preserve at least 10,000 acres of open space over the next 5 years. They started with $15 million bond, and frankly, the mayor does indicate that that's a drop in the bucket of what we need to do. But then again, this is a public-private partnership, and over the next 6 months, they're going to establish a set of short and long-term goals that will guide this initiative moving forward. But this will be true open space and preserving of land in its natural state. So prairie lands and nature, so that, and it'll be accessible for people to go into, but not in a let's go play baseball or hang out on a basketball court or climb on a piece of equipment. It'll be in its natural state.
So what's your feel about, I felt like, and we talked about it last pod, but in the State of the City, she really didn't talk about transportation at all. So you're still finding a win.
Are you trying to find a loss for me in this?
No, I was just actually surprised that this made the win list, but this is win for parks and stuff. But.
Right. And if there are parks within 5-minute walk of people, then you don't have to get in your car to drive to those.
Yeah.
So maybe that helps on the transportation side. People can walk to these things. So I think it's an intentionality of providing things within the bubbles that people live in, so that they're not having to get in their cars to access these things.
The last short story kind of also talks about the quality of life, and that's art, which I am excited. Next week we'll have
Wesley Gentle will be our guest next week. He heads up Arts Fort Worth.
Yes.
And they are housed in the Community Arts Center along with Public Art and several other tenants, Kids Who Care, and some other tenants that are in the Community Arts Center, which brings me to the opportunity for all of our listeners to participate and have their voices heard. There was a task force which made some recommendations to the council about how to address the necessary improvements that need to happen to the actual building of the Community Arts Center, which is in the Cultural District. After years of deferred maintenance and putting on the nonprofits themselves the responsibility to maintain a building, which, in my opinion, should not have been put on them. It should have been something the city took care of because it is a city building. But the city decided to move forward with looking for a private partner to redevelop the Community Arts Center. And the two finalists that some folks from the task force along with some city staff came to the conclusion that these two finalists were the ones that would present their proposals to the community. And there was a meeting last week where those proposals were presented, and you can go to the city's website on 13 Guindy on the city's website, which is the address of the Community Arts Center. And those proposals are on there, and you can see them in their entirety. And then there is a link on there to give your opinion, what you liked about each of the proposals, what you don't like about each of the proposals, what you would like to see, and all of that. Now, this is very time sensitive because that request portal, that opinion portal has been open since the meeting last week. And then they are only giving us 4 or 5 days, and the deadline is 4 p.m. on Monday. So this podcast is Monday morning, bright and early. If you're listening bright and early, you have time to get on there and make your voices heard. 2 proposals that are pretty different from each other. And so I really encourage folks to get on there and make sure that their voices are heard.
Here we go. Well, we have a pod where I believe 80% of people listen to it on Monday. So they'll be able to hear this.
Yep. And this also feeds in very well to our guest next week. So that's
yes.
really good as well. There were a couple other wins that I had jotted down just from
Come
my
on now.
travels.
Hands on fire.
And some of them tie into some of the articles we talked about today. But this walkability situation and having things available within close proximity to where you live, I returned from this trek that we went on where we walked 48 kilometers in a very, natural area. So that ties into kind of the open space. And then we were walking every day. I was hitting my 10,000 steps, no problem. And I was so excited to return to fall weather where I could continue to do that. So the Sunday after we got back, I walked to the grocery store that's 2 blocks from my house and did some grocery shopping with a basket that has wheels on it so that I could carry home more than just a bag of groceries. And then I came home also to the fact that the Cowtown Marathon has moved their headquarters into a shopping center that's in close proximity to my house. And the person that I work out with twice a week has moved her Pilates classes into that facility. And the Cowtown Marathon is offering some community classes to the community, and they're free through the first week of November, I believe. So look that up. But Tuesday morning after our return, I walked out of my house to walk to Pilates. And as I was walking up the street, I heard my husband's voice, and I turned around, and he was walking back to our house from TCU, where he is teaching a class now twice a week, and he walks there every morning to teach, or those Tuesday and Thursday mornings, and to teach that class. And so it just reiterated to me that the neighborhood that I live in has a lot of these things, and I was pleased about that, and it made me happy to be home after being gone for 3 weeks and exploring and doing some fabulous stuff in other countries. But it also reinvigorated me to continue to be an advocate and an activist to kind of bring more of that ability to our city that we love.
Yeah. That was beautiful, and I'm glad that you're the co-host of the 817 Pod to make sure we continue to make it a priority for everyone.
And I'm glad you didn't quit while I was gone.
We had a moment, me and Dee. We had a moment. She saved the pod. She was very gracious. She was just like, "Hey, you guys are doing great." It's just it's a lot to keep up, but we're doing a good job. Well, that's the pod, beautiful people. We did 3 wins and losses. And we had a lot of big stories and the short stories. So a lot of that stuff will continue to update. Next week we'll have Wesley to talk about the work. And, continue to move. Later.
Follow us like double tap. Now they control your life. Dopamine swipe.